Medieval India. Chapter number 16, Economic and Social Life under Mughals. Economic and Social Conditions. The Mughal Empire reached its territorial zenith by the end of the 17th century. During the period, it had to face many political and administrative problems, some of which we have already discussed. In the economic and social spheres, the period from the advent of Akbar to the end of the 17th century may, however, be treated as one, since there was no fundamental changes. However, the period saw important social and economic developments that we shall try to analyze. Standard of living, pattern of village life, the masses. During the period, many European traders and travelers came to India, and many of them have left accounts about social and economic conditions of the country. In general, they have emphasized the wealth and prosperity of India and ostentatious lifestyle of the ruling classes on one hand, and on the other, the grinding poverty of the ordinary people, the peasants, the artisans, and the laborers. Babur was struck by scanty clothes worn by ordinary people. He observed that peasants and people of low standing go about naked. He then goes on to describe the langota or decency cloth worn by men and the sari worn by women. His impression has been corroborated by later European travelers. Ralph Fitch, who came to India towards the end of the 16th century, says that at Banaras the people go naked, save a little cloth bound about their middle. They laid wrote that the laborers had insufficient clothing to keep themselves warm and cozy during winter. However, Fitch observed in the winter, which is our May, the men wear quilted gowns of cotton and quilted capes. Similar remarks have been made about the use of footwear. Nikitin observed that the people of Deccan went barefooted. The modern author Moreland says that he did not find a shoe mentioned anywhere north of the Narmada River, except Bengal, and ascribes it to the high cost of leather. As far as housing and furniture were considered, little need to be said. The mud houses in which the villagers lived were not different from those at present. They had hardly any furniture except cots and bamboo mats. The earthen utensils which were made by village potter. Copper and bell metal plates and utensils were expensive and were generally not used by the poor. Regarding food, rice, millets and pulses, what Pelsat and Deliet call khichdi, formed the staple diet, with fish in Bengal and on the coasts, and meat in the south of the peninsula. In North India, chapatis made of wheat or coarse grain with pulses and green vegetables were common. The ordinary people, it is said, ate their main meal in the evening and chewed pulse or other parched grain in the day. Ghee and oil were much cheaper relative to food grains then and seemed to have been a staple of the poor man's food. But salt and sugar were more expensive. Thus, while people had less clothes to wear and shoes too were costly, on balance they ate better. With more grazing land, they could keep the more cattle, so that more milk and more milk products must have been available. The standard of living ultimately depended upon income and wages. It is difficult to determine the income of large mass of peasants in real terms, for money hardly entered into transactions in villages. The village artisans were paid for their services by means of commodities which were fixed by custom. It is difficult to compute the average size of the holding of the peasant. The information available to us shows that there is a great deal of inequality in villages. The peasant who did not have his own plough or bullocks often tilled the land of the zamindars or the upper castes and could eke out a bare existence. The landless peasants and laborers often belonged to a class of people called untouchables or kamen. Whenever there was a famine, and famines were frequent, it was this class of peasants and the village artisans who suffered the most. The peasants who owned the land they tilled were called khudkasht. They paid land revenue at customary rates. Some of them had many plows and bullocks which they let out to the poorer brethren. The tenants or the Muzarian who generally paid land revenue at a higher rate. Thus the village society was highly unequal. The Khudkasht, who claimed to be the original settlers of the village, often belonged to a single dominant caste or castes. These castes not only dominated the village society, they exploited the poorer and weaker sections. In turn, they were often exploited by the zamindars. It has been estimated that the population of India at the beginning of 17th century was about 125 million. Hence, there was plenty of cultivable land available. And it may be summarized that a peasant would cultivate as much land as this means for family and circumstances would allow, subject to social restraints. Unlike many other countries in Asia and Africa, India had a well diversified economy with the cultivation of a large variety of crops such as wheat, rice, gram, barley, pulses, bajra, etc. Even as also crops which were used for manufacture or could be processed locally. These were cotton, indigo, ché, the red dye, sugarcane, oil seeds, etc. These crops paid land revenue at a higher rate and had to be paid for in cash. Hence, they are often called as cash crops or superior crops. The peasant not only shifted his cultivation from one crop to another, depending on prices, but was also willing to adopt new crops if he found it profitable to do so. Thus, during the 17th century, two new crops were added, tobacco and maize. Silk and tussi cultivation became so widespread in Bengal during the period that there was no need to import silk from China. The adoption of potato and red chilies followed during 18th century. Regarding efficiency of production, it should be noted that countryside was able to feed a growing city population during the 17th century. During the period, India also exported food grains, especially rice and sugar, to some of the neighboring countries. It is also able to provide the raw materials needed for expansion of manufacturers during the period, especially the manufacture of textiles. The Mughal state provided incentives and loans, takavi, to the peasants for expansion and improvement of cultivation. But the expansion and growth would hardly have been possible without local efforts, initiative, and investment. Thus, the Indian cultivator was not as conservative and resistant to change as he has often made out to be. Although no new agricultural techniques were introduced, Indian agriculture was on balance efficient and played a defining and definite role in the growth of manufacturing sector and the trade during the period. In the medieval times, the peasant was not dispossessed from his land as long as he paid the land revenue. He could also sell his land if he could find a buyer, and the rest of the community raised no objections. His children inherited his land as a matter of right after his death. Although the state dues were heavy, sometimes amounting to nearly half of his produce, there is no reason to believe that the peasant was left only with enough to keep body and soul together, and was in no position to invest anything for the improvement of land or extension of cultivation. Although the life of peasant was hard, he had enough to eat and meet his simple requirements, that is, production and reproduction. The pattern of life was fixed partly by the season and partly by the custom and tradition in which fairs, pilgrimages, ceremonies, etc. had their due place. But the condition of landless and the section of the artisans, including the menials, must have been much harder. As far as the cities were concerned, the largest section consisted of the poor, the artisans, the servants, the slaves, the soldiers, manual workers, etc. The salary of the lowest grade of servant, according to Ethiopian travelers, was less than 2 rupees a month. The bulk of menials and foot soldiers began at less than 3 rupees a month. It has been calculated that the man could feed his family on 2 rupees a month. Moreover, Morland, who wrote in early part of the 20th century, observed that during the period there was little change in the real wages of workers. They had a more balanced diet, but clothes, sugar, etc. were more expensive. Morland concluded from this that the conditions of Indian people had not worsened under the British rule. But the matter has to be seen with a wider context. While there was a vast increase in wealth and rise in real wages in Europe during the period, there was overall stagnation, if not decline, of living standards in India under the British rule. But this is a matter which will be studied in greater detail in the volume on modern India. Thank you everyone for tuning in. In the next part, we'll start with the ruling classes, the nobles and the zamindars. All the best for exams. Do share and subscribe to the channel for more videos and keep supporting us. Thank you everyone.